At the beginning of last year, I went before the Board of Ordained Ministry for my ordination interview. Now, if you don't know what that means, basically, to become a fully ordained pastor, we have to write like 80 pages of theology, and then we send it in, and I have to go before a panel, and they grill me on my theology, on all the questions that they asked me and all the answers that I provided. And so they grill me on it. They ask me a lot of questions. Then I leave the interview, and as a group, they vote on whether they think I am ready to be a pastor or not. And last spring, right before I moved to this church, I went before the board, and then I left. And then they called me up. Actually, it was that night. It was like 8 hours later. And they said, "No, you are not ready to be a pastor." And so 6 months later, they said, you have to work on some stuff. We want you to work on some stuff and come back before the board. It's not that you're a hopeless case, but you got some stuff you need to work on. And so 6 months later, I was now working in this church, and I was rewriting a bunch of my paperwork, and I was working on all the stuff they wanted me to work on. I was getting ready to go back before the Board of Ordained Ministry, and I went to one of the prep meetings, and I was talking to one of the other candidates, and I go to the meeting, and he looks at me, and we were talking about our fruitfulness project. I'm sure you don't know what that is. The Fruitfulness Project is a big part of the ordination paperwork, where I have to describe something that I did in a church, a project that I started, and how it built the kingdom of God. I have to report on something that I started. And so we were talking about our Fruitfulness Project, and my friend, he was well-meaning, but he looks at me and he goes, "Man, it is such a bummer that you didn't get through last time, that you have to rewrite all that paperwork. Is it frustrating that you have to come up with another fruitfulness project?" And I looked at him and I said, "Let me tell you a story. In the Philippines, there is a seminary, a school that where they train pastors to be pastors. And one of the requirements for graduation is that every student in that school has to go out into the world and bring 10 people to Christ. And to graduate from that seminary, you have to go out into the world and bring 10 people into a meaningful relationship with God. Now, you got to understand, this is a Muslim-controlled area of the world, and there is no freedom of religion. It's incredibly dangerous to be telling people about the love of Jesus in this place. And so a few years, it was more like 7 or 8 years ago, there was a graduation ceremony, and where all the students were getting ready to graduate at the seminary. And at that graduation ceremony, they had to have a moment of silence in honor of the 2 students who died trying to bring the love of Jesus to this broken world. Their fruitfulness project is so dangerous where they are living that some of them died trying to get it done. And so I turned to my friend at the prep meeting for the Board of Ordained Ministry, and I said, "So you're asking me if I'm upset that I have to rewrite a little paperwork?" "No, I'm good." I'm good. Today, we begin a new sermon series called The Road to Rome Part 2. We are going chapter by chapter through the book of Romans, and we're going to start in Romans 5. Next week, we'll do Romans 6, and so on. And one of the key themes of Romans chapter 5 is finding glory in the midst of pain. But the truth is, American Christianity is not good at talking about suffering. We're not good at talking about having conversations about struggling. We have lived at the top of the world for so long that we have forgotten that there can be blessings that come through our struggles. We've forgotten that completely. There was a long time ago, there was a meeting back in the 4th century. It was called the Nicene Council. Maybe you've heard of this. They gave us what we call the Nicene Creed, right? And at that council, there were 318 delegates from all over the Christian world. This is in like 323 AD or something like that. And so they get together, all these delegates, and of those 318 delegates, over 300 of them were missing limbs because of torture for their faith. Some of them were missing eyes or feet or hands or toes. I'll do the math for you. That's over 94% of the leaders in the early church had been physically attacked and permanently maimed for their faith. These are the people that gave us the Nicene Creed, one of the foundational documents of our faith. So let's open up to chapter 5 of Romans. And it says, Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have a peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into the grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Now, I said that this is a new sermon series, but in actuality, this church, we are reading the entire book of Romans over the next year, and we're doing it in 4 chapter segments, right? And so back in August, we did the first 4 chapters, and now we're doing the second 4 chapters, and then we'll take a break and come back. And so really, these first 2 verses kind of give us a nice recap of the first 4 chapters. It says that we have been justified by faith, by believing in Jesus. We have a peace with God. Because what Romans, the early chapters, was all about how glorious God is and how incredible and awesome God is, and we don't measure up. We cannot stand in the presence of all that awesome, but with Jesus, we have a peace with God. And it's a really beautiful message, and he could have just stopped there, but he ruins it by continuing into verse 3, where he says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." We have a peace with God, and that's great. But then it says we glory in our suffering. We glory in our suffering? No, we don't. Like, who's glorying? Of course we don't do that. You ever glory in your suffering? Like, that doesn't even make sense. What is he talking about? You know that moment where you're running late for work, right? And you're driving just maybe a little bit too fast and you get pulled over by the cop? You ever glory in that moment? You're like, oh yeah, this is the best. I am so excited. I get to pay $140 to the state of Michigan. I don't want to talk about why I know it, the numbers. Woohoo, I'm so excited. I'm glorying in myself. No. Or my parents. Parents, where you at? I got some parents or grandparents in the house. All right, you know that moment when the kid wakes up at 3 a.m. and he takes a good 45 minutes to get him back to sleep, right? And it takes so long to get him back to sleep. The kid's asleep, but now you have to try and fall asleep, but it's too late, right? And by the time you fall asleep, you're going to have to get up anyway, so you just get up at like 4 a.m. You're glorying in that moment? I know I'm not, right? All right. I'm so excited that I get to get up way before any rational, sane human being ever should. We have a peace with God, but we glory in our suffering. You ever look at a teaching in the Bible and you just kind of think, ew. No, Paul, nice try, but I don't want to listen to that. But it's in there. And we're the Christians who take the Bible seriously, and so we got to deal with this. And Paul does explain it to us. He explains. He says that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame. So basically what Paul is saying is that we are stronger because of the suffering that we go through in our life. The struggles that we go through have the ability to help us grow. There's an old story about a guy named Parnell Bailey. And he was visiting an orange grove to look at it. I think it was like a potential investment. And the irrigation pump at this grove had broken down, and it had been an unusually dry season. And so some of the trees were beginning to die off, for lack of water. And the man giving the tour then took Parnell Bailey. He took him to his own personal orchard where the trees were thriving. And he said, yeah, my trees could go another 2 weeks without rain, because when my trees were young, I frequently withheld water from them. And what that did was the hardship caused them to send their roots deeper down into the soil in search of moisture. So now my trees are the deepest rooted trees in the area. So while others may get scorched by the sun, my trees will find moisture at a greater depth. So if we can make it through the suffering of this life, what we will find is that our roots go deeper than ever before. And then verse 6 sort of shifts gears a little bit, and it says, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely would anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now you might recognize those words. They're pretty famous, right? While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And I get kind of overwhelmed reading this stuff, so I'm going to make it through it. Let's walk through it. Verse 6, he says, at just the right time, which begs the question, do we trust God's timing? At just the right time, Christ, it says that at just the right time, while we were still powerless. Let's make no mistake, the right time was while we were still powerless. God comes to us before we put ourselves back together. God comes to us before we turn our lives around. God comes to you on your worst day, in your darkest moment, when you are at the lowest you have ever been. That is when Jesus shows up in our lives. When we are helpless and powerless and we are not worth anything to God, that's when he comes to you. That's when he comes to you saying, I am here and I love you. He looks at you and he believes that you are worth more than your worst day. That's not how our society looks at it, right? If you lie, the world will call you a liar. If you kill, the world will call you a murderer. If you are in prison, they will call you a prisoner for the rest of your life. That is your label. That is your identity. But God looks at you on your worst day. He knows whatever you've done. And he says, I'm not going to define you that way. I believe that you are more than your worst day. Verse 7, Paul compares God's love to what we find in the world. And it says, he points out that dying for somebody else, that's really rare in this world, right? I mean, we don't die for each other very much. And he says, okay, like maybe you would die for someone if they were a really good person, right? Maybe you'd be willing to give up you might be willing to die for them if they were a really good person. But, I mean, they got to be like a Mother Teresa, Santa Claus hybrid level of awesome before we're willing to give up our lives for them, right? They got to be really great. Nobody's dying for bad people. Nobody's out there dying for the scum of the earth. That doesn't happen. I mean, well, think about it. If you're going to give up your life, right? If you're going to sacrifice yourself for somebody else, you want to know that they're going to, that they're worth it, right? If I'm going to give up my life, I want to know that they earned my sacrifice. They better go up, grow up and cure cancer or something. If I'm going to give up my life, I want to know that it is worth my sacrifice. Verse 8. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Do you see the difference? See, what I want you to see this morning is that God's love is so much better than our love, than what we can come up with in this life. God's love is so incredible. What I want to point out is God's love is better than our love while we were still sinners. You see, you can't clean yourself up and then come to Jesus. That's not how it works. We come to Jesus broken and messed up by this world, and God cleans us up. Jesus Christ died on the cross. He came into this world, died on the cross, taking our sin and our shame, so that when he rose from the grave and defeated sin and death, we could walk in a life just like he does. He gave us that second chance. It says, at just the right time, while we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Here's what I want you to realize this morning. Christ only died for ungodly people. Which is kind of weird because in our culture, we don't like to talk about that. We don't like to admit weakness. We hide our weakness. We try to pretend that we are better than we actually are. But Christ died for sinners. Christ died for the ungodly. So stop trying to pretend. Stop pretending you are better than you actually are. It's kind of like, where's my sinners at in the room? All right, so a couple people, okay, yeah. But then when I read Romans and I say, okay, but here's the deal. Only sinners get to be saved by Jesus. So now where are my sinners at in the room? Right? We all want to be included in that category, right? Me. If you know how good Jesus is, if you know how incredible his healing is, what it feels like to be forgiven, to walk in a new life with God, I am eager to identify as a sinner. I am eager to look at my, to point out my status as a broken person. Here's a kind of a silly example. We were eating dinner a couple of weeks ago, and I look over at my child's plate, and I see that he has followed his father's footsteps and avoided the vegetables that are on the plate. And so I ask him, "Hey, buddy, you going to eat your vegetables?" And he kind of looks at me. He had that like sassy attitude that 3-year-olds have mastered. No. No, I don't want to eat my carrots, Dad. All right, man, but I was thinking about having some ice cream. Oh, ice cream? I want some ice cream. Oh, well, no. Only people who eat vegetables get ice cream. Oh, no, like he says I can't eat them fast enough, right? I know it's a silly comparison, but that's how it works. Only broken people get the healing of Jesus, right? Only Christ died for the ungodly. So suddenly I am eager to admit my status as a sinner, eager to admit that I am powerless, that I am ungodly, that I need help, because that's the kind of person Jesus came for. At the end of the chapter, it says in verse 20, the law was brought in so that trespass might increase. But where sin increased, grace increased all the more. See, we talked about this back in August when we were doing the first couple of chapters, but the law of God, it shows us, it helps us to see where we are. It helps us to see that we are far away from God. I use the metaphor that the law of God is kind of like the bathroom scale, right? Because if you're trying to lose weight or gain weight, the bathroom scale is not going to help you lose weight, but it shows you where you are so that you can work on it. That's what the law of God does. It shows us that we are far away from God and that we need him. Following the law doesn't earn you heaven. That's not how it works. But it shows us that we are far away from God and that we need his forgiveness. But with grace, God gives us a clear lens to look at in our life. We can look unashamed at the sin in our life, at the mistakes we have made. See, I think a lot of us waste a lot of time in life trying to convince ourselves that we are better than we think that we are. We fill our world with distractions so we don't have to think about who we are. We compare ourselves to other people, always people who are just a little worse than us, right? We compare ourselves to other people. We try to forget our worst moments and focus only on our best moments. We run away from the cold, lonely, brutal honesty of looking in the mirror. But I need you to hear me. With God, you have the freedom to be honest with yourself. With God in your life, you have the freedom to admit your mistakes. You can be honest about how low the valley goes because God tells us you are not defined by your valley. You are not defined by your mountain. You are only defined by the fact that I love you. That's what God tells us. You are defined by the love of God. You can admit to your worst day because with Jesus, your worst day does not define you. When we step into the glory of God, into the forgiveness that has been offered to us through Christ, that's the first moment in our lives when we can be truly honest with ourselves. Where sin increases, grace increased all the more. The good news this morning is that you are all dirty little sinners who will suffer in your life. That can't be right. Let me read it again. The good news this morning is that you are all very dirty little sinners who will suffer a lot in this lifetime. How could that possibly be good news? We are sinners? How could that be good? Well, okay. But Christ died for sinners. And so if I am a sinner, that means that God looked down on me in my sin and loved me so much that he sent Jesus Christ for me. That's great news. I'm okay all right, there we go. So if I'm a sinner, Christ died for me. The Son of God loves you so much, he came and died for you, a sinner. That's awesome news. But what about that other half? We are a sinner who will suffer? That can't be right. Suffering can never be good news, right? Once upon a time, there was a man who had a caterpillar, and he loved his little caterpillar. And he took very good care of it. He fed it, gave it little fruit and leaves and stuff, and he watched over it as it spun its cocoon. And after a couple of weeks, the caterpillar was ready to emerge from the cocoon, and a teeny tiny little hole appeared at the bottom. It was such a small hole, and it really seemed like the little guy was struggling to get out of that hole. And so, the man, out of compassion, cut open the cocoon. He cut the hole a little bigger so the little guy could get out easier, so he wouldn't have to squeeze through the hard times and life would be more comfortable. But the butterfly that emerged out of the cocoon surprised him. He had this big swollen body and these teeny tiny little wings. And he kept waiting for it to take off, to fly, but it never did. So the man went to the library and he did a little research. And he found out that butterflies are supposed to struggle. They have to squeeze through that little hole because the liquid in their body gets pushed up into their wings. That's how they inflate their wings. Did you know that? It's kind of interesting, right? The liquid, they have to squeeze through that little hole. Without the struggle, the butterfly can never, ever fly. By removing the struggle, by making life easier than it needs to be, it would never fly. Paul teaches us that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. I don't know about you guys, but I want perseverance. I want character in my life. I want hope in my life. And so I think what Paul is saying is that if you want to build character, you need suffering. If you want to build perseverance, if you want to have hope in your life, you need suffering. If you want to fly, you need the struggle. Now, of course, in American culture, that's crazy talk, right? That doesn't make any sense. In the modern world, we run away from suffering at every opportunity. We hate suffering. We hate struggling, right? If it is difficult, we believe that we should give up, run away from that, right? That's kind of how we do life in America, right? If it's hard, we avoid it, right? That's how we do education. That's how we do our work ethic. That's how we do relationships. If it's hard, we run away. That's too much. I don't want to be a part of that. I get, every single day I get advertisements on my phone and on my tablet and on the internet and on my TV, and every single advertisement has the exact same message for me. Your life should be as easy as possible. It doesn't matter what they're selling, that's what they're telling me, right? Your life should be as easy as possible. But what I want to show you this morning is that God takes the way the world does it and flips it on its head. God says, no. Your life should not be as easy as possible. Did you guys see the viral video of the week? The Botham Jean trial thing? Maybe some of you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know it, here, I'll fill you in. There's a woman named Amber Geiger, and she was coming home from a long day at work. She was a police officer, and she was really tired, and she got to her apartment building, and she went in the wrong apartment. She thought she was going home into her apartment. She went into the wrong apartment and saw a stranger sitting on the couch. And she thought it was an intruder. And her being a cop, she was still suited up. So she shot and killed the man in his own living room. To complicate the fact, she is a white police officer. And he was an unarmed black man sitting in his own living room eating ice cream. And so the trial was so full of tension. Right? This was such a charged issue. This was such a sensitive thing. And so the trial was such a huge thing. And the sentencing was this past week. And so she's going to jail for about 10 years, it looks like. She could have gotten all the way up to 50, but the 10 years. Because, she killed a guy, right? Even if it was an accident or whatever. She killed a man. And so after the sentencing, they have something called the Victim Impact Statement, where the family of the victim is allowed to address the defendant. And so the family got a chance to talk to them, and Brant Jean, Botham Jean's younger brother, he got up on the stand, and he kind of blew everybody away. He got up on the stand, and he said, and my family probably won't agree with this, but I forgive you. If you are really sorry, I forgive you. I don't even want you to go to jail. What I want for you is for you to find the love of Jesus Christ. That's what he said in the courtroom. He's like, all I want is for you to come to know the love of Jesus Christ, because that's what I know my brother would want for you. And then, that already was pretty crazy. But then he turns to the judge, and he says, I don't know if this is possible, but could I give her a hug? And the judge kind of what? And so he says, please. And so the judge allowed it, and he went and he gave her a hug. And she's bawling. She lost it, right? And she just clung to him. It was like a minute-long hug. And if you haven't hugged someone for a long time, that's a long hug. They just clinged to each other, crying in the courtroom. And it blew people away that he would do this. But here's the thing. After that moment, that went viral. The video of them I cried. It was just a crazy thing. But after that moment, the backlash was really interesting because people were attacking that young man, saying, you should not be forgiving her. She only got 10 years. Your brother is dead. You should be furious. You should want vengeance. You should be lashing out. You should be angry. You should be hateful. They were trying to tell this man how to act and what to think and what to feel, and they could not wrap their mind around forgiveness. And honestly, if you're coming at this without Jesus, of course it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense that he would be loving towards the woman. I mean, he embraced the woman who killed his brother. And the world says vengeance. The world says anger. The world says hatred. But Jesus says forgiveness. Takes the world and flips it on its head. When you are a sinner who will suffer, that sounds like terrible news to the rest of the world. But with Jesus, with the actions of God, it becomes very good news. Maybe it's not happy news, but it is good news. So there's two big takeaways from this. The first thing, my first challenge for you guys is I want you to take the world and flip it on its head. Flip the world on its head. Do you think, I'm wondering, can we be people who are willing to admit that we are not perfect? Could that be what this church is known for? In a culture that encourages us to present only the best side of who we are, take the perfect selfie, post the hilarious captions and the clever witty sayings, create the picture-perfect social media presence. Can we be the people that are radically countercultural? Can we admit to our mistakes? People who highlight their struggles, highlight their sin, and boast in God's glory, boast in God's forgiveness. Can we admit that we are sinners, flip the world on its head, and then, part two, after we have taken our status as sinners and turned it into a good thing because of the grace of Jesus Christ, can we take it one step further? Can we glory in our suffering like Paul challenges us to do? Can we believe that God can use the brokenness of this world to work a good thing in our lives? Can we look at the pain we endure, at the suffering we go through? Can we look at that and give thanks to God? Can we, dare I even say it, embrace suffering in our life? Can we embrace suffering? I have to be careful here because there is a clarification that I have to put out there. Embracing suffering is not the same thing as allowing or accepting evil, because there's a little bit more to the story of Botham Jean. Botham Jean was shot in his own apartment, and then his brother forgave the shooter. But there's another person in that courtroom that we need to talk about. Her name is Allison Jean, Botham's mother, who was heartbroken at what happened. Now, she's a Christian. She also said, I do forgive her, but there was injustice in this trial. There was like evidence tampering and witness intimidation. There was a lot of nasty stuff going on in this trial. And she said, we need to stand up against injustice in the world. And I think both stories need to be told. Yes, we can embrace suffering and we can find forgiveness and have those beautiful moments, and we can stand up against evil in the world and say we're not going to accept evil. We can do both. Can we embrace suffering? Did you know that the times in history when the church has been the most authentic, where it has grown the most and done the most good in the world, those are the moments in history when we have been the least powerful? That's the moments we have done the best good, because in our weakness, God has done incredible things. What I want you to realize today is that comfort does not move us. Comfort does not move us. So maybe what Paul was trying to tell us is that suffering is not the worst thing in the world to be avoided at all costs. Maybe suffering has purpose. Did you know that the underground church worldwide is stronger than the American church? It is. The underground church worldwide, Christianity is growing in size. Worldwide, Christianity is exploding in size, just not in the places where it is comfortable. Listen to that sentence again. Worldwide, Christianity is exploding in size, growing like wildfire, but not where it is comfortable. Think about the Council of Nicaea, where they created one of the most famous foundational documents of our faith. Over 90% of those leaders were missing limbs from the torture that they endured for their faith. The moments in our history where we have embraced suffering, the moments when we have worked to understand suffering as a gift from God that produces character in our lives, those are the best moments in Christian history, the most honorable. Flip the world on its head. Last year, I was rejected by the Board of Ordained Ministry. It was not fun. It did not feel good. But it was a really good thing that happened in my life. It was great because I dug deeper. It was the first time in my career that I had failed at something that I was trying to do. And I was starting to get that ego. People expected me to fly through the Board of Ordained Ministry like it was nothing. They were like, of course you'll pass. I had a lady come up to me after and she said, so we're already planning your party. She just assumed I'd passed. I had to tell her, oh, sorry, no party. It was not fun, but it was good because it caused me to dig deeper. It caused my roots to go down further, for me to grow and to get better and to realize that I'll never be done growing, that I will always have more to work on. If I had not gone through that failure, that suffering, and I don't even think it was that big of a suffering, but if I had not gone through that, I would not be growing. I would not be who I am today. And so I'll leave you with this. May you flip the world on its head. May you never forget that God comes to you not when you've got your life all put together. He comes to you in your worst moments, and He loves you. He says you are better than your worst moments. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And finally, may you glory in your suffering, because you know that it produces character which can lead you to hope, and hope will not disappoint. Amen.